You've probably noticed this long before anyone ever pointed it out to you. You're in a conversation, the words are flowing, you're listening, responding, engaging. On the surface, everything looks normal, but internally something feels off. The conversation feels thin, predictable, shallow. You already know where it's going before the other person finishes their sentence. You can anticipate their opinion, their reaction, even their conclusion. And once you see it, the entire exchange loses its energy. So you nod, you give short replies, you disengage quietly, and later, maybe you wonder why. Why do conversations feel exhausting instead of stimulating? Why do you feel mentally drained after social interactions that seem to energize everyone else? Why do you find yourself avoiding conversations, not because you dislike people, but because talking feels like work? Most explanations miss the point. They tell you you're introverted or socially anxious or reserved, or maybe even arrogant. They assume avoidance means insecurity, fear, or disinterest. But that explanation never fully fits, does it? Because you're not afraid to speak, you're not incapable of conversation. And when the topic finally does become interesting, when depth appears, when nuance enters the room, you can talk for hours without effort. So the problem isn't communication, it's mismatch. You've likely experienced this moment. You offer a thought with layers, context, or implication. Something subtle, something that connects ideas together. The other person responds, but not to what you actually said. They respond to a simplified version of it, a flattened interpretation. The complexity disappears, and suddenly you're no longer having a conversation. You're translating. You adjust, you rephrase, you simplify, you remove nuance. And with every adjustment, the exchange becomes less engaging, less alive. Not because the other person is unintelligent, but because the conversation is now operating at a level far below where your mind naturally functions. Over time, you learn something without ever consciously deciding it. Avoidance is easier than constant translation. Silence is easier than compression. Solitude is easier than pretending shallow conversations are meaningful. And this is where the misunderstanding begins. From the outside, it looks like withdrawal. From the inside, it feels like conservation. You're not running from people. You're protecting clarity. You're protecting energy. You're protecting the part of your mind that thrives on depth, coherence, and exploration rather than repetition. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people never consider. Conversation is not neutral. It has a cognitive cost. And for certain minds, that cost is significantly higher when depth is absent. You're not avoiding conversation because you lack social skill. You're avoiding it because you're aware of what it usually becomes. This video isn't about glorifying isolation or dismissing others. It's about understanding something that's rarely articulated honestly. Because once you understand why conversations feel draining, the self-doubt dissolves, the guilt fades, and the question shifts from what's wrong with me to something far more accurate. What am I actually responding to? And that question is where the real explanation begins. At some point, someone explained your behavior to you. Maybe a teacher, maybe a friend, maybe a well-meaning article you read online. They gave you a label: introvert, quiet, socially reserved, and at first it seemed to fit well enough. You accepted it because it was simple, because it explained why you didn't crave constant interaction, why long conversations felt draining, why small talk felt unbearable. But over time, the explanation started to crack, because introversion doesn't explain everything. Introversion suggests you lack energy for social interaction itself. But that's not actually true, is it? When the conversation becomes meaningful, when ideas are exchanged instead of repeated, your energy doesn't disappear, it appears. You lean forward, you become animated, time passes unnoticed. The same mind that shut down moments earlier suddenly feels awake. So the issue isn't social contact, it's content. Another explanation you've probably heard is social anxiety, that you avoid conversations because you're afraid of judgment, conflict, or saying the wrong thing. But again, that explanation collapses under observation. You're not anxious when speaking about things you understand deeply. You're not afraid to challenge ideas. You're not uncomfortable expressing yourself when there's substance on the table. Anxious people want to speak but can't. You can speak. You just often don't want to. Then there's the most subtle explanation of all, arrogance. That you think you're above conversation, that you're dismissive, that you believe others aren't worth your time. This accusation stings because it feels morally charged. It implies character flaw instead of cognitive difference. And because you don't want to be arrogant, you start questioning yourself. But here's the problem. Arrogance involves overestimating yourself. What you experience is something else entirely. You're not assuming superiority, you're reacting to friction. The friction of compressing complex thoughts into fragments, the friction of repeating points that feel obvious, the friction of conversations that circle endlessly without progressing anywhere new. None of the standard explanations address this friction. They all focus on personality traits, emotional states, or social comfort. But they ignore something fundamental, how different minds process information. You weren't taught that intelligence changes how conversation feels. You weren't taught that cognitive complexity alters what is stimulating, what is draining, and what feels meaningful. Instead, you were given psychological labels that pathologize your response without explaining its cause. And once you accept those labels, something subtle happens. You start blaming yourself. You force yourself into conversations you already know will exhaust you. You override your instincts. You tell yourself you need to practice social skills or push through discomfort. But the discomfort never disappears, because it was never fear in the first place. It was misalignment. This is the false explanation, that avoidance equals weakness, insecurity, or deficiency. That if you were healthier, more confident, or more socially skilled, you'd enjoy most conversations. The reality is far less comforting and far more precise. Some conversations are cognitively incompatible with the way certain minds operate, and once you understand that, the question isn't why intelligent people avoid conversations, it's why they were ever expected to enjoy most of them in the first place. Intelligence isn't just about knowing more facts or using bigger words. That's the shallow definition. The real difference shows up in how the mind moves, how it connects ideas, anticipates patterns, and looks beyond what's immediately being said. For a more cognitively complex mind, conversation is never just a sequence of sentences. It's a web. Every statement carries implications. Every opinion suggests underlying assumptions. Every claim invites context, counterpoints, and consequences. While someone is speaking, your mind is already several steps ahead, mapping where the idea leads, where it breaks, and what it overlooks. And this changes how conversation feels. When the exchange stays on the surface, opinions repeated without examination, stories told without reflection, conclusions reached without reasoning, there's nothing for that kind of mind to engage with. No tension, no exploration, no discovery. The conversation becomes static, like reading the same paragraph over and over. This is why intelligent people often feel bored, not superior. Boredom is a signal that the mind is understimulated, and for someone whose thinking naturally seeks depth, abstraction, and coherence, most everyday conversations simply don't provide enough cognitive material. The problem isn't that the other person lacks value, it's that the format of the exchange doesn't match the way your mind processes information. Think about how quickly you recognize patterns in conversation. You can tell within minutes whether a discussion will go anywhere new. You hear a familiar argument and already know the counter-argument that won't be acknowledged. You hear a story and sense the conclusion before it arrives. The predictability drains interest long before the conversation ends. This creates a subtle internal conflict. You want connection, you want understanding, but you also want stimulation. And when conversation fails to offer both, something has to give. Over time, the mind learns that disengagement is more efficient than endurance. There's another layer to this. Intelligent people tend to think in nuance rather than binaries. They see multiple sides simultaneously. They're comfortable holding uncertainty, contradiction, and complexity. But conversation, especially casual conversation, often rewards certainty and simplicity. Clear opinions, strong stances, quick conclusions. So when you speak carefully with conditions and qualifiers, you're often met with confusion or impatience. Your precision is mistaken for hesitation, your depth is mistaken for overthinking, and eventually you learn that speaking less creates less friction. This isn't withdrawal, it's adaptation. When intelligence alters how meaning is constructed, it also alters what feels worth expressing. Conversations stop being automatic, they become selective, and silence becomes not an absence, but a choice shaped by clarity. Once you understand this, the behavior makes sense. Intelligent people don't avoid conversation because they dislike people. They avoid it because intelligence changes the experience itself. One of the most important shifts in understanding human communication is realizing this. Most conversations are not designed to exchange ideas. They're designed to regulate emotion. People talk to feel connected, reassured, validated, or aligned. Conversation, for most, is a social tool, not a cognitive one. It's how people signal belonging, relieve tension, affirm identity, and stabilize their sense of self. And once you see this clearly, a lot of confusion disappears. When someone shares an opinion, it often isn't an invitation to examine it. It's a declaration of how they feel. Agreement feels good, disagreement feels threatening. So conversations naturally drift toward affirmation rather than exploration, toward emotional harmony rather than intellectual progress. This is why logic so often fails socially. You might respond to a statement by analyzing it, questioning its assumptions, or pointing out inconsistencies. But the other person wasn't offering an argument to be refined. They were expressing an emotional position. Your response, however reasonable, feels to them like friction rather than contribution, so they resist. Not because you're wrong, but because the emotional need hasn't been met. This is exhausting for a mind oriented toward thought rather than feeling. You're engaging on one level while the conversation is happening on another. You think you're discussing ideas. They think you're challenging identity. You think you're clarifying. They feel attacked. And after enough of these mismatches, your mind adapts. You start to notice patterns, how quickly emotion overrides reasoning, how often people defend conclusions they've never examined, how rarely someone pauses to say, "I hadn't considered that." Instead, you see justifications appear instantly, constructed not to discover truth, but to protect comfort. For an intelligent person, this creates a sense of futility. If the outcome of most conversations is emotional maintenance rather than insight, then effort feels wasted. Why carefully articulate a nuanced position when it will be reduced to a feeling-based reaction? Why explore complexity when simplicity is emotionally safer? So avoidance begins, not out of arrogance but out of accuracy. You're responding to the function of the conversation, not its surface form. You recognize that many interactions are emotional rituals, not intellectual exchanges. And once you see that clearly, forcing yourself to participate feels dishonest. This is where the misunderstanding deepens. Others assume you're distant or disengaged, but internally, you're simply aware of what's happening. You see that reasoning doesn't move the conversation forward because the conversation was never about reasoning in the first place. Understanding this doesn't make you cold. It makes you precise. You stop offering logic where comfort is being sought. You stop arguing where reassurance is the goal. And sometimes you stop speaking altogether, not because you have nothing to say, but because the conversation isn't built to receive it. And that awareness is the beginning of clarity. Depth has an unintended side effect that few people talk about. It makes others uncomfortable. Not because depth is aggressive or dismissive, but because it changes the emotional temperature of a conversation. When you ask a deeper question, introduce nuance, or challenge an assumption, you're doing more than adding information. You're disrupting stability. You're forcing a moment of reflection where certainty once existed. For many people, certainty feels like safety. Most beliefs aren't held because they've been carefully examined. They're held because they provide emotional grounding, identity, belonging, reassurance. So when depth enters the conversation, it doesn't feel like curiosity. It feels like exposure, like something solid is being quietly pulled apart. This is why thoughtful questions often receive defensive responses. You might ask, "Why do you think that?" or "What makes that true?" And instead of reflection, you get irritation. The tone shifts, the conversation tightens. Suddenly, you're no longer discussing ideas, you're managing emotional resistance. Intelligent people notice this early. They notice that introducing complexity often triggers discomfort rather than interest. That nuance is mistaken for disagreement. That careful analysis is perceived as criticism, and over time, they learn a pattern. Depth invites tension. There's another layer to this. Depth highlights contrast. When someone encounters a way of thinking that moves more slowly, more carefully, more thoroughly, it can make their own thinking feel rushed or incomplete by comparison. Not because you've said anything explicitly, but because contrast itself creates awareness, and awareness can feel threatening. So instead of engaging, people often deflect. They change the subject. They simplify the issue. They joke. They dismiss. Or they label the depth itself as unnecessary, overcomplicated, or pretentious. This protects their sense of competence without requiring reflection. From the outside, this looks like hostility or disinterest. From the inside, it's self-preservation. Intelligent people absorb this pattern unconsciously. They learn that speaking precisely often leads to misunderstanding, that asking honest questions creates friction, that sharing genuine insight can quietly shift the mood of a room. So they adapt, they self-censor, they keep thoughts internal, they offer lighter versions of their ideas or none at all, not because they fear conflict, but because they see the cost-benefit clearly. Depth rarely gets welcomed. More often, it destabilizes. This is why avoidance begins to look like wisdom. It's not that intelligent people think others are incapable. It's that they recognize depth requires consent, and most conversations aren't prepared for it. When depth arrives uninvited, it feels like intrusion. So intelligent people learn something essential. Not every space is safe for clarity. Not every conversation can hold truth without turning defensive. And once you understand that, silence stops feeling like absence. It starts to feel like respect for both yourself and the limits of the moment. One of the most persistent misunderstandings about intelligent people is the assumption that solitude means isolation, or worse, loneliness. From the outside, choosing to spend time alone looks like withdrawal, but from the inside, it feels like alignment. Loneliness is the absence of connection. Solitude is the presence of clarity. For a mind that operates deeply, constantly engaging in shallow or emotionally driven conversations creates noise. It fragments attention. It pulls thought outward instead of allowing it to unfold inward. Over time, this noise becomes mentally exhausting. Solitude, in contrast, restores coherence. It allows ideas to develop fully instead of being interrupted or diluted. This is why intelligent people often feel more themselves when they're alone. In solitude, there's no need to compress thoughts, no need to simplify, no need to monitor reactions or manage emotional undercurrents. Thinking can move at its natural pace. Connections can form without interruption. Questions can remain open without being rushed toward premature conclusions. This isn't avoidance of people, it's relief from distortion. Many people fear being alone because silence confronts them with unresolved emotion or uncertainty. But intelligent minds often experience the opposite. Silence is not emptiness, it's space. Space to explore ideas, refine understanding, and regain mental equilibrium. And once you experience that contrast, it's hard to ignore. After a period of solitude, conversations feel different. You're more selective, more intentional. You don't speak to fill space. You speak when there's something worth expressing. This can be misinterpreted as distance or detachment, but it's actually respect for your own mind and for the conversation itself. There's also a biological element to this. Deep thinking requires sustained attention. It requires uninterrupted cognitive flow. Frequent social interaction breaks that flow, forcing constant shifts in focus, tone, and emotional calibration. Solitude protects that flow. It preserves the continuity that intelligent thought depends on. This is why solitude doesn't drain intelligent people, it restores them. Loneliness feels heavy, solitude feels grounding. One is marked by absence, the other by presence. The mistake happens when society treats all aloneness as a problem to be solved. It assumes that constant interaction is healthy by default. But for certain minds, the opposite is true. Too much interaction creates fragmentation. Too little clarity creates discomfort. So intelligent people learn to choose solitude deliberately, not as escape, but as maintenance. Not because they don't value others, but because they value coherence. And once you understand this distinction, the guilt disappears. You're not withdrawing from the world, you're returning to yourself. Clear thinking has a cost that isn't immediately obvious. It disrupts harmony. Most social systems are built on shared assumptions, unspoken agreements, and emotional alignment. Groups function smoothly when members think similarly, speak predictably, and avoid questioning the underlying structure. Clarity, real clarity, introduces friction into that system. When you think clearly, you notice inconsistencies others overlook. You see where narratives contradict reality. You hear assumptions embedded in casual statements, and even if you don't say anything, your awareness alone places you slightly out of sync with the group. This is why intelligent people often feel tension in social settings without knowing why. Group conversations reward speed and certainty, not precision. They favor strong opinions over careful ones. Clear thinkers tend to slow things down, introduce conditions, or ask questions that complicate the emotional flow. From the group's perspective, this feels disruptive, even if the intention is constructive, so clarity becomes costly. You might notice that when you speak honestly, the room grows quieter, jokes fall flat, eye contact shifts, the energy changes, not because you said something offensive, but because you said something that couldn't be absorbed without adjustment. Groups resist adjustment. Social cohesion depends on shared simplifications. When those simplifications are challenged, the group instinctively protects itself. The response isn't usually open disagreement, it's subtle exclusion. Your comment gets ignored, the topic changes, or you're quietly categorized as too serious, too analytical, or overthinking. These labels serve a purpose. They neutralize the threat of clarity without engaging with it. They allow the group to maintain emotional equilibrium without confronting uncomfortable truths. Over time, intelligent people recognize this pattern. They learn that thinking clearly often means standing apart, that honesty doesn't always create connection, that insight can create distance rather than respect, and this realization changes behavior. You become quieter, not because you lack thoughts, but because you understand the social consequences of sharing them. You choose your moments carefully. You stop offering insight where it will only create friction. This isn't cynicism, it's social intelligence. You see that groups aren't designed for truth-seeking. They're designed for stability, and clarity threatens stability by introducing uncertainty. So intelligent people adapt. They speak when precision is welcome. They remain silent when harmony matters more than accuracy. They accept that not every environment can tolerate depth without discomfort. The cost of thinking clearly is real. It's not dramatic or confrontational, it's subtle. It shows up as distance, misinterpretation, and quiet resistance. But understanding this cost removes confusion. It explains why intelligent people often feel like observers rather than participants, why they sense limits before speaking, why silence sometimes feels like the most accurate response. Clarity isn't antisocial, it's simply expensive. At the end of all this, the point isn't separation, it's clarity. The moment intelligent people stop avoiding conversations out of frustration and start choosing them with awareness, something quiet but profound happens. The tension dissolves, the resentment fades. Not because the world has changed, but because expectations have. This is where acceptance begins. Acceptance doesn't mean believing others are inferior. It doesn't mean withdrawing in contempt or isolating yourself in superiority. It means recognizing that human minds operate differently and that most conversations are shaped by needs that have nothing to do with insight or truth. Once you see that clearly, there's nothing left to fight. You stop expecting depth where it was never intended. You stop offering nuance where simplicity is required. You stop measuring connection by how intellectually stimulating it is and start recognizing it for what it actually provides: emotional alignment, familiarity, reassurance. And in doing so, you become calmer. There's no longer a need to prove anything, no need to demonstrate intelligence, no need to correct or clarify unless it serves a real purpose. You allow conversations to be what they are without demanding they become something else. This is not disengagement, it's precision. You reserve depth for those rare moments and people who can meet it. You speak fully when the environment can hold it. And when it can't, you don't force it. You step back without bitterness, without judgment, without internal conflict. This acceptance creates freedom, freedom from the constant question, why doesn't anyone understand? Freedom from the pressure to perform socially, freedom from the exhaustion of translating your thoughts into smaller and smaller pieces. You begin to see silence differently, not as absence, but as space. Space to think, to reflect, to remain aligned with yourself rather than fragmented by constant interaction. And something else happens too. When you stop forcing depth, the people capable of it begin to stand out naturally. You recognize them quickly, not because they say impressive things, but because they listen differently. They ask questions instead of defending positions. They're curious rather than reactive. These connections are rare, but they're real, and they're enough. The real reason intelligent people avoid conversations isn't fear, arrogance, or disinterest. It's discernment. It's an understanding of how communication actually works and when it doesn't. When you accept that, avoidance turns into choice, silence turns into strategy, and conversation becomes something you enter consciously, not something you endure. This isn't about being above others. It's about being honest with yourself. And once you are, everything becomes lighter. This channel exists for people who think carefully, who feel out of place in shallow conversations, and who are looking for understanding rather than validation. We explore psychology, philosophy, and human behavior without simplifying what shouldn't be simplified, without pretending everyone thinks the same way. If you want more videos like this, calm, precise, and grounded in real insight, make sure to subscribe. New videos here aren't about motivation or hype. They're about clarity, self-understanding, and navigating the world intelligently, without bitterness or illusion. Subscribe if you value depth. Subscribe if you're tired of noise. And subscribe if you want to think more clearly in a world that rarely encourages it. I'll see you in the next one.